Truth Caviar, the show about ideas that matter. Hosted by global thinkers Brent M. Eastwood and Vadim Bichutsky. This is episode 2 of the Truth Caviar show. Today we're talking the Great Reset, what it is, its aspect, how it will affect our way of life, what does it mean for individual liberties, and so on. So Brent, what is the Great Reset? How would you define the Great Reset in a sense or two?
There's a couple of main objectives and goals, but first is to transform the global economy, eliminate free markets, and impose a new, more easily controllable and malleable economic system to change the way people think of private property and corporations. Now, we got this a little bit after the Cold War under George H.W. Bush.
Right, in the early 90s.
In the early 90s with the New World Order.
Right.
And I call that New World Order 1.0. And this one is New World Order 2.0. 1.0 was based on democratic capitalism winning over global communism.
That was the New World Order, sort of right of center New World Order, whereas this is more left of center New World Order.
Correct. And there's one global techno-fascist state we're talking about. And this is going to replace nation states. This is open borders. This is taking sovereignty away from countries. This is taking self-rule away from countries. So it's a new kind of authoritarian. It's a new kind of international. It's a new kind of socialistic fascism. So authoritarianism for a brand new technology-rich, corrupt era. It is 21st century fascism.
So this global techno-fascist state, they will use big tech to control the populace across the world.
And it's similar to the Chinese system. So we're talking about emerging of markets. We're talking about Asian-style corporatism and European-style corporatism that is foreign to the United States. We're talking about authoritarianism. We're talking about collectivism that China has with communism and modern technology, as you said.
These global elites, they love the Chinese system, right? They love they call it its efficiency. They love how efficient it is. It's authoritarianism, controlling the capitalist system.
Authoritarian capitalism, so elements of capitalism, but taking away individual liberties.
So it's not a true capitalism.
Freedoms.
It's not a free market.
It's not democratic capitalism. That's right. And
go ahead.
Well, this is also not about helping the poor.
Exactly.
The poor get left behind. It's not about saving the planet. They think it's about saving the planet. It's not. It's about making the rich richer and expanding the power of the ruling class.
So it hands over unprecedented amounts of authority to a handful of elites and their friends.
Just a few people, just a few corporations, just a few civil society organizations.
Ruling elite of Wall Street, Davos, and D.C.
And don't forget Brussels, the European Union. Don't forget Beijing. Don't forget a lot of these world capitals too. So the Great Reset is a culmination of all that global elites have been striving for over the past century. They love it. And this goes back to America's progressive era and the internationalism of racist, power-hungry men like Woodrow Wilson.
The slogan, The Great Reset, came out in June 2020 in a seminal paper that was written by the World Economic Forum. So they were going to use the COVID-19 pandemic to start the implementation of this Great Reset, of this transformation of the global economy into this global techno-fascist state.
They love crises. They
never let a crisis go to waste.
Never. Rahm Emanuel under President Obama never let a crisis go to waste. So they love these times of calamity where they can step in and say, we should be in charge.
What we saw during the pandemic, so-called pandemic, many small businesses were called non-essential businesses. And that created a huge wealth transfer from small businesses to these global corporations. That was part of the Great Reset. That did not happen by accident. That was deliberate.
And you're never going to have a small business owner or a small business invited to Davos. These are all corporations.
A few big corporations are easier to control than millions of small businesses.
Oh, sure. That's the big part of it. It's all about control.
Yes, absolutely. Here's an interesting quote from Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum. And we'll get into the World Economic Forum in just a second. I'm going to read you 2 quotes from Klaus Schwab. COVID-19 has accelerated our transition into the age of the 4th industrial revolution. We have to make sure that new technology in the digital, biological, and physical world remain human-centered, serve society as a whole, and provide everyone with fair access. The second quote, this global pandemic has also demonstrated again how interconnected we are. We have to restore a functioning system of smart global cooperation structured to address the challenges of the next 50 years. The Great Reset will require us to integrate all stakeholders of global society into a community of common interest, purpose, and action. So, couple of points, right? New technologies in the digital, biological, and physical world. So you see how they will employ the big tech tyrants to control the populace. So that's the digital angle, but also biological and physical, right? So biological, think of the vaccines, and also the physical. So they want to destroy the human physical world and replace it with this digital world. So think of the metaverse. The metaverse will play a key component in this transformation of this human physical world into this digital tech world.
If you can control healthcare, you can control the population. Rules to radicals, Saul Alinsky. Now, let me interject something about vaccines. We talk about vaccines on this show. We are not anti-vaccine. I got the COVID vaccine.
Correct.
I spoke to my doctor, my family. We made a personal choice. I got boosted. I didn't get COVID. I've had other vaccines throughout my life. What we're looking at and discussing is
mandates.
How the mandates,
yes,
the robbing of freedom, the individual freedom. People like Bill Gates who thinks, the world should be vaccinated against all kinds of different diseases.
Correct. So we're not against vaccines. We're against the mandates because every person on this planet has a God-given right to make his or her healthcare decisions. My body, my choice, bodily autonomy. Another point I was going to make about these quotes from Schwab. Another key passage in here is integrate all stakeholders of global society into a community of common interest, purpose, and action. So if you notice a couple of things, he keeps talking about global society, not individual nations, but the global society. And then this idea of stakeholders and the way that they're going to push this transformation of the global economy is through what Schwab calls stakeholder capitalism, in contrast to shareholder capitalism, which is the traditional free market capitalism that we all love in the West. And Brent, so can you compare and contrast stakeholder capitalism and shareholder capitalism, because it sounds kind of similar, right? So if you're not closely paying attention, you might miss that distinction.
And so the idea behind democratic capitalism that is focused on shareholder capitalism is that a corporation has a responsibility towards its shareholders to create value. And this is usually measured by a share price. What they're looking for, investors based on shareholder capitalism, is growth in earnings, growth in profit, growth in revenue, growth in sales. This delivers value to shareholders. Now, one thing that we associate corporations with having shareholders on Wall Street and they sell shares and you can buy them on the open market, but also startups. And small businesses have shareholders as well. As they go from a seed round to a Series A round to Series B, you also, as a private company, have shareholders, and you're trying to show growth the same way. Profit growth, sales growth, earnings growth, and so forth. So that has been the model for democratic capitalism, and it has created huge increases in people's wealth. It allows people to invest in companies and build generational wealth with investing in corporations or investing in private companies and startups.
Traditional shareholder capitalism, the great capitalistic system that we love, the free enterprise system, the job of a corporation is to provide goods and services that make money in the marketplace and enrich their shareholders. It has nothing to do with society or, what's good for the planet or what's good for government. The only job you have as a corporation is to produce goods and services that people love and buy from you, and therefore provides value to your shareholders. That's a very minimal in scope. It's important to understand this narrow scope that somebody like Milton Friedman used to talk about a lot, God bless his soul. And now, when we talk about stakeholder capitalism, although it sounds kind of very similar to shareholder capitalism, it's actually very, very different. Stakeholder capitalism says not only are you supposed to provide goods and services, but you also have to do it in accordance with what government says, what's good for society, how you're providing goods and services. In other words, how many underrepresented minorities are on your board? Who are you hiring? Are you doing what the government tells you to do? And the way that they're going to implement this stakeholder capitalism concept with something called ESG scores. And what this is a collection, I believe, of about 35 metrics. E is for the environment, S is for social, and G is for government. The standards, so this ESG scores, are divided into these pillars: government, planet, people. In the G, in the governance pillar, the World Economic Forum suggests that companies be scored based on the membership of underrepresented social groups serving in companies' governing body, as well as those leaders' competencies related to economic, environmental, and social topics. So how many minorities are on your board, and how competent are these leaders on all these economic, environmental, and social topics. Then they have something called the planet pillar, where companies are evaluated based on their greenhouse gas emissions. That's the E component. Their compliance with the Paris Climate Accords, their land use and ecological sensitivity, their water consumption and withdrawal in water-stressed areas, and other environmental standards. Then they have the people pillar. Each of these pillars have a certain set of ESG metrics that apply to that pillar. Woke ideology, including an ESG measure for the percentage of employees per employee category by age group, gender, and other indicators of diversity, as well as pro-labor union measures, such as the percentage of active workforce covered under collective bargaining agreements. You have these ESG metrics that will score your business in accordance to compliance with all of these pillars.
And the Biden administration wants to use the Security and Exchange Commission to force corporations to give their ESG scores to the federal government. And so this is another way that the government is trying to control the way corporations govern themselves. And let me interject something, because we were talking about minorities on boards. We are pro-minority at this podcast, pro-immigrant. We want minorities to do well. We want them to become rich. We want them to own homes. We want them to have generational wealth. But this idea that ESG governs over who you hire takes away from the basics of democratic capitalism.
From merit. It's not a merit-based system.
It's self-government that we're trying to look for in corporations. And they can't provide value to the shareholders if they're having government oversight or World Economic Forum oversight into what they're trying to accomplish as a corporation to deliver value for their shareholders.
We're a merit-based society. That's what has generated so much prosperity in America. That's what makes America great. The idea that you're going to be forced to do something, that's where the line is crossed. You can put incentives, you can suggest people do certain things. We're against forcing people to do something.
And in terms of investing, and it's getting away from buying individual shares for retail investors. Now we're looking at these huge investment funds, BlackRock, Vanguard, and others, and they have segments of their population that would normally invest in shareholder capitalism. They are investing in ESG firms. And we think that you should focus on delivering value to your shareholders, not this.
That should be your main concern. That should be your main concern. Provide goods and services that people love.
And ESG has become so political. ESG has a S&P 500 index of 500 companies with high ESG scores. They kicked off Tesla, one of the most pro-environmental corporations in the world, that pretty
definitely
much
political. Definitely.
Yeah, just because of some of the things that Elon Musk has said. And so it just gives you an idea how political this whole thing is.
Whenever you put more power in the hands of bureaucrats is going to get political. And just to circle back to ESG scores real quick. So I just want to underscore why it's such a big deal. So why would, like, as a business, why would your ESG score matter? Because your ESG scores will be used to determine how much access to capital you get, what bank accounts you can open, what is your interest rate, how much money can you raise from investors. ESG scores essentially control how you run your business.
And World Economic Forum loves this.
Because it gives them control.
World Economic Forum is a non-governmental organization, a nonprofit. They're out of Switzerland. They do have offices in New York City and San Francisco. They're a lobbying group too, because they're trying to change laws and they're trying to change politics and government. They were founded in 1971 by Klaus Schwab. We don't know a lot about Klaus Schwab other than his initial training as an engineer and an economist, but he makes about 1 million Swiss francs a year from his nonprofit. So you could argue that he is using his power to create his own wealth.
How many dollars is that?
Well, that's over $1 million. We'd have to look up the exchange rate for Swiss francs, but let's just say Klaus Schwab is getting very wealthy on World Economic Forum. Now, the way this works is that about 1,000 corporations around the world, they pay dues to this exclusive club. So usually up to around $500,000 a year, depending on if you're a silver member or a gold member or so forth. But the idea behind World Economic Forum is they want to improve the state of the world. Now, that sounds innocuous. That sounds harmless, but let us get into this more and you will see how insidious this is. So they want to shape global agendas. What does that mean? Well, once a year, they meet in Davos, which is a ski resort, and they have about 500 different sessions in 5 days, and everybody's invited, but these are all global elites. And then they have regional conferences each year in Africa, East Asia, Latin America, and don't forget the big annual conference, which is in China.
They love the Chinese system.
Oh, sure. And so this is a basic belief that the world should be managed by corporations, by governments, and civil society organizations.
Because they know better. They're the smart ones. Right?
Not the population, not the people who want to self-govern, who believe that, for example, the United States of America is exceptional. No, that is over. No exceptional countries, no borders, no sovereignty, no self-rule.
We're just rubes, according to them, who don't know what's best for us.
And then the World Economic Forum loves to thrive on crises. So COVID-19 pandemic, the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, they do not let a crisis go to waste.
And they'll use climate change to fully implement. It started under COVID, but they'll use climate change. So the so-called existential threat of climate change to finish the implementation of the Great Reset.
They love this. They love global instability. They love class warfare between the poor and the rich. And so we had the Great Recession, we had COVID-19, this idea to change the world. We have people like Bill Gates, who are popular speakers, George Soros, of course. Did you know Prince Andrew spoke?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Right. Right. And by the way, they love the population fighting amongst each other, right? Like Democrats and Republicans, because when we're divided, we're distracted from what they're doing. It's not left versus right. It's the elites, the ruling class elites versus everybody else.
And the World Economic Forum is anti-Israel. In 2006, they sent out a boycott Israel article to 2,300 participants of Davos. Everybody got a copy. So this is real. We are not making this stuff up. This is directly off the World Economic Forum website. They admit what they're doing. They show you what they're doing. They invite people like Xi Jinping to speak. They invite Vladimir Putin to speak. Why would you follow an organization and be part of an organization that would have Putin and Xi Jinping speak to your populace?
What is that expression? Birds of a feather
flock together.
Flock together, right? Another big component of the Great Reset, because it's a global movement, right, to create this one global techno-fascist state, is the eradication of national sovereignty. So open borders, what Biden is doing, allowing unlimited illegal immigration.
This idea of the New World Order, that we're one global community.
Yes.
Instead of having self-rule, exceptionalism, and language, borders, and culture.
Right. So this idea that we have to undermine the nation state, right? That's what open borders do, right? They create one homogeneous world.
And this is the New World Order.
Correct. Open borders, elimination of the nation state, and create this global system of political decision making. And these global elites, ruling class elites from Wall Street, Davos, and these people sit at the top and make all the decisions for us.
Let's back up a little bit. You mentioned the fourth industrial revolution. Let's get into that a little bit more, because this is something, again, on the website. They define it, and it's this Orwellian belief. So you have the new technologies of this world. You have Internet of Things, you have autonomous vehicles, you have AI, robotics, nanotech, biotech, which is big for vaccines, and quantum computing. So you take all those technologies, and the World Economic Forum has an office in San Francisco to be right on top of Silicon Valley.
Right.
And the idea is that the elites should control these technologies, that it should come from the corporations. Now, we already determined from last episode, if you listen, that these corporations do not always innovate and create the new technologies. They're part of the administrative state. So the World Economic Forum loves the administrative state. They love bureaucracies and they love corporations. And if you take away the corporations and focus instead on entrepreneurship, small business, and people creating technology from the bottom up. They hate bottom up. They want top down.
Centralized control, because they want to be in control. They hate self-government. They hate the traditional capitalist free enterprise system that allows me to start a restaurant, to start a small business, to start a bakery. Because if I have my own business, you can't control me. It's much harder to control me if I'm an independent, have my own income, you can't control me. So they hate small businesses.
And COVID-19 helped them crack down on that too.
Absolutely. It was used as a pretext to shut down, to eradicate small business and transfer the wealth to these corporations.
The World Economic Forum also serves as a think tank. So this gives you an opportunity to go on their website and read some of these papers. They have been pumping out this information for decades, and it's really amazing. So they also have something called Young Global Leaders. This is where they take young elites and they indoctrinate themselves into the Great Reset and getting away from democratic capitalism. So this is a 5-year participation round of folks that they invite to the World Economic Forum in Davos, and they indoctrinate these people. They become members, and then they can join different types of clubs in the World Economic Forum. So you have the Global Health Initiative for the pandemic and COVID-19 and vaccines. You have the Environmental Initiative, and they say they're impartial and non-political and nonpartisan. Don't believe that. Don't believe that. They're social democrats, they're democratic socialists, or they're socialists. They say they're impartial, but these are Orwellian themes that they propagate each year at Davos.
Another important aspect of the Great Reset is modern monetary theory. Brent, can you give us like a 30-second overview of modern monetary theory?
Real quick, it is a group of academic economists, and their idea is that high money supply, loose monetary policy, and loose fiscal policy, which means unlimited money printing and unlimited spending by the government, allows for economies to grow. But we know that those two types of monetary policy and fiscal policy have created 8.6% inflation and 1% year-over-year inflation, some of the highest inflation in the United States since the 1980s, early 1980s. So this is modern monetary theory, MMT. Now, let me explain to you a little bit how monetary policy has worked since the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. You've heard of quantitative easing probably with monetary theory and the Federal Reserve Bank. So this idea is that every month, the federal government offers an auction, and you can buy, corporations can buy, funds can buy, countries can buy, but more importantly, the Federal Reserve Bank can buy treasury bonds, 2-year bonds, 5-year bonds, 10-year bonds, all the way up to 50-year bonds. And you buy those with the Federal Reserve Bank. It goes on their balance sheet. Meanwhile, the Treasury puts the money out there and increases the money supply. So if you do this every month, you have quantitative easing. Now, what we've found out is that this drives down artificially the interest rates. So that's why we had such low interest rates, because more money out there is supposedly helping small businesses, large businesses to fund different types of the economy. So home building, and people can take out loans at low interest rates, and banks can lend to companies at low interest rates. So usually low interest rates are pretty good, unless you are printing so much money that the monetary supply gets so big, and you're combining that with fiscal policy. This is from Keynes, meaning that if you prime the pump, if you spend more money with the federal government, that you're going to increase the money supply even more, which is the Biden administration has done in the past, last couple of years. So you're seeing more money supply going out there. Well, when you have too much money chasing too few goods, you have inflation, and that is what has happened. Now, the modern monetary theorists, the MMT folks, say this doesn't matter, because they say, well, look, unemployment is low and it's creating jobs. And so deficits don't matter to MMT. Loose monetary policy doesn't matter to MMT. Now, one thing, two things. Federal Reserve is doing two things right now. They're raising the federal funds interest rate, and that is raising interest rates for 30-year mortgage bonds and 30-year mortgages, and making it more expensive for people to pay back credit cards, and making home loan mortgages more expensive, and people are building fewer homes. So that all hurts the economy. So you have that. And then you also have something called quantitative tightening. So I mentioned the bonds. So there's mortgage bonds, and there are treasuries. Now, backing up a little bit on treasuries, this is basically when you buy a treasury bond, you're lending money to the American government. Well, it's not just Americans that buy bonds. China is the number one foreign entity that owns the most treasury bonds in the world. They could sell those bonds and really mess up the American economy. So going back to the two things, so you have fiscal policy, monetary policy, and then you also have something called quantitative tightening. So quantitative tightening is the opposite of quantitative easing. Tightening means you allow those bonds, the Federal Reserve Bank allows the bonds to expire. So each year you're having more bonds expire. You let them fall off the balance sheet, and then the Treasury is not printing more money. So that reduces the money supply. So the idea is that you raise interest rates and reduce the money supply. That will lower inflation.
MMT is basically Keynesian economics on steroids.
Yeah, talk about John Maynard Keynes a little bit.
Yeah, so he was this economist he's not even an economist. He's a mathematician by training. That's a big lie. Big lie, that's a common term in common parlance these days. The big lie is that John Keynes was an economist. He was a mathematician from England, and he published a textbook in the middle of the Great Depression, impressed a lot of elites because they love control, that basically said that government spending, you can spend your way to prosperity. That was the main thesis of his book. And then after the war, a lot of these economists, a lot of these finance types, they met at Bretton Woods to discuss the monetary system after World War II. The Keynesian model won out. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency. Keynesian economics is this idea that fiscal policy matters the most, aggregate demand. The more the government spends, the better. You can spend your way to prosperity. And that's what we saw in the Great Recession when Obama came in 2009. He instilled this stimulus that poured a lot of government spending into the economy, paid back his cronies who got him elected. Modern monetary theory says if even a single person isn't working who wants to work, the government should pump even more money into the economy to achieve full employment.
And raise taxes.
Right. They believe that the government knows better. They know how to spend better. The idea of the modern monetary theory is that debt and deficits don't matter. Because the US dollar is a currency issuer, there's no danger that the country will ever become insolvent.
And redistribute wealth.
Modern monetary theory says that we should use the money supply to control the economy, redistribute wealth, reward the so-called good guys, and punish the undesirables. And it feeds right into the Great Reset because of control, of centralized control, that the government will decide how to spend money the best instead of the private sector.
And remember, World Economic Forum loves academia. So if you go to college and you take the first macroeconomic course on the curriculum, you learn about the aggregate demand curve. Now, what is the aggregate demand curve? Well, this is the idea that the total economy is based on consumer spending, investment levels, government spending, and exports. And that is the aggregate. Now, in the United States, about 70% of our economy is consumer spending. So that stays pretty much the way. It goes up and down depending on inflation and depending on the economy and depending on employment. But that's the major part of the American economy. But then you have the G, and the G stands for government. And so the Keynes folks, and this is almost everybody that teaches economics, because there's a saying, we're all Keynesians now.
Right.
The Keynes folks believe that if you spend more government money, unlimited fiscal policy, you're going to create more economic growth. Now, Reagan believed that the way to deal with inflation, he had a Fed Reserve chief named Paul Volcker, was to raise interest rates, but also later supply side economics, which is the belief that if you cut government spending and you reduce taxes, you'll get more money into the system that will help consumption and get the interest rates down, so you will be able to grow the economy that way. But just remember, one thing about modern monetary theory and the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset is that people get indoctrinated into a certain way of thinking about economics based on academia, based on the professors. And
Correct.
There's more and more professors that are adhering to modern monetary theory. They love it. They love teaching it, and they're indoctrinating more students.
Almost entire academia is in love with Keynesian economics. They love it because why? Because they get kickbacks from the government. Keynesian economics says government spending is good. Well, who are the beneficiaries of that government spending? The universities.
They write grant proposals and they get more money from the government.
Absolutely. I just want to underscore a couple of things about modern monetary theory. Because debt and deficits don't matter under its model, you can basically print an unlimited amount of money and reward those entities, the good guys who have high ESG scores.
It's all
and
tied
if you
in.
have, that's how it all ties together. But if you have a low ESG score, you won't get as much money or none at all. This is why elites love modern monetary theory, because it provides a way for them to fund all of their control.
And if everybody around the globe is doing modern monetary theory, then you can have a global currency.
Oh, yeah, that's another good point. If you have a global digital currency, well, guess what? If you have a digital currency, then it's easy for me to cut off your money because I can just push a button. You have a low ESG score. And by the way, it should be emphasized. So ESG scores will apply not just to businesses, but also to individuals. So imagine you have a digital currency, right? Well, this guy is a bad actor. He has low ESG score. We'll just cut off his funding. You see what happened in Canada with the truckers, right? They just cut off bank access and savings, even if you donated like $20 to a trucker. This is all about control, this techno-fascist state. Everything is digital. Nothing is physical. We can just cut you off based on your behavior, based on your ideology, based on who you hire, based on how you think, based on how you live your life. It should be fought. Every freedom-loving person must reject it out of hand.
And if you love the United States of America and you believe the United States is a exceptional country, the shining city on the hill, then you will see how the Great Reset is trying to subjugate this. And remember, you can read about this on their website. They work as a think tank. They're writing papers. They have the young global leaders. They're training young global leaders to become prime ministers. So then they can come back to the World Economic Forum and say, oh, I'm elected as the head of state now. And so I can propagate more international governance over individual companies and countries.
The Great Reset is not a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy theory. This is open on their website. Klaus Schwab has published a book on the Great Reset and also a book on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. This is a real deal. I just want to read this quote from Naomi Wolf's book. It summarizes everything that we just talked about here. The real goal is to dissolve and destroy Western and human culture and to replace it with a techno-fascist culture, a culture in which we have forgotten what free human beings can do.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Let's talk about technocrats. What is a technocrat? Well, this is a person who works in a bureaucracy that has a little bit of technical expertise that they learned maybe in undergraduate education or graduate education. They may have majored in political science or public policy, and they have some subject matter expertise, yet they are the ones that are making these decisions in government. Now, some people think, and Parag Khanna is an author that talks about having global technocrats take over, and technocrats take over the United States. I'm friends with Parag, and he's a good guy, but he's misguided and he's anti-American on this because we believe that governments should be part-time. The leaders are also business owners, they're doctors, they do different things, they have different vocations, and they come into government just for a little bit of time, as opposed to bureaucrats that are in for life. And this is civil servants in European countries too. Most young people in Europe dream about having a civil servant job because that is a job for life. And you have the government sector unions that are adding to this. So technocrats are the belief that instead of hiring people from lower economic classes, instead of popular people being elected, we're going to elect these technocrats. And then the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset says, let's do this globally through the World Economic Forum, because we're going to train young global leaders to become technocrats. Because remember, World Economic Forum is running the fourth industrial revolution. So the future of technology is being propagated to not the masses and not to the populace, but to an elite few who are technocrats.
Yeah, so technology is being used not to enhance communication and freedom across the world, to open up opportunities and markets, but to create a centralized top-down body that controls the entire world.
And the World Economic Forum, they pick a theme every year. This is another giveaway. They do these Orwellian themes each year. So one of them has been called the reshaping of the world. They have another one called the Great Transformation. They have one called Shaping the Post-Crisis World. Remember, crisis, big theme for World Economic Forum. Shaping the Global Agenda, Responsible Globality. What does that mean? You know, they come up with this stuff that is just ridiculous.
Academic sounding, professoriate talk.
Here's one that is redefining the basic assumptions of the world economy. So it's all this renewal, redefinition, responsibility, transformation, reshaping, all of these Orwellian words.
Another thing about the Great Reset that's important to understand is that they're against private property rights. You will own nothing and you will be happy. In practice, how it's being implemented now is you have these institutional investors buying all of these homes, all these single residential properties, and they want to rent those out. Great Reset is a complete antithesis of the founding fathers' vision of America with property rights, individual liberties, free market capitalism. All of those pillars of America are being destroyed by the Great Reset.
Here's more from the World Economic Forum website, and you can check this out. It's right on their website. They look at the window of opportunity to shape the recovery. Remember, we're always in, like the communists, the communists believe we're always in a revolutionary state. World Economic Forum believes that we're always in a crisis mode, and that the
never let a crisis go to waste.
And the elites have to swoop in and save the day. So the revamp all aspects of our societies, from education to social contracts and working conditions. So a new social contract where you give up individual rights that goes to this overarching international organization. You give up your rights and let the smart people tell you what to do.
So Brent, I have a question. You talked about technocrats. How is that different from the managerial elite?
It's very similar to the managerial elite.
Essentially, technocrats.
They work together.
Are the managerial elite?
They are, for government.
For government, okay.
Mm-hmm. So part of the administrative state, and we talked about that last week. So you have a group of people that are not creating things. On this podcast, we like creators. We like entrepreneurs. We like people who develop technology, file patents, use their creative energies to better themselves.
To create new goods and services that benefit society.
That benefit society in democratic capitalism. The administrative state believes that technocracy and government and bureaucracy is the way to create value. And that doesn't create value. It's antithetical.
And we talked about on the previous episode, this idea that our free economic system was created for entrepreneurship, not management. Entrepreneurs create wealth. They create goods and services that people love. They create businesses that hire others. From their goods and services, you have derivative goods and services that improve society. Whereas management is in the middle. They prevent entrepreneurship. They block creativity. They increase the cost of starting a business, of thinking, of creativity, of creating new things. It's the opposite of what our founding fathers had for a free market economy that allows individual wills and creativity and hard work to flourish.
Absolutely. And this indoctrination to technocracy comes from academia. I'm a political scientist, so I studied public policy. The idea of public policy is that you're a technocrat, that you have expertise and that the government only trusts you because you're a technocrat. And this comes from schools of public policy all over the country.
It goes back to the progressive era, Woodrow Wilson, right? His argument was in the early 1900s was that, hey, we just had this industrial revolution that happened in the late 1800s. So his argument back then was similar to the argument we have now, is that, hey, we're in the new world order. Our founding fathers didn't anticipate the industrial revolution. The Constitution has to be transformed. Our government, our system, our systems have to be transformed in light of this industrial revolution. That was the American progressive. That was their argument for why they were seeking the changes that they were seeking. And it's very similar to what the Great Reset guys say, right? It's like, hey, we're now in this internet age. Borders don't matter. Nation states don't matter. We're all global economy. We're all interconnected. We should have one global society, one homogeneous with one government, and with them at the top. So it's a very similar argument to what the American progressives were saying.
And it historically led to more progressivism with FDR and the Great Depression, because this is when government got a lot bigger, more technocrats, more people who were working out of Washington, D.C. to tell people in the states how to live.
And again, in the 30s, they exploited the Great Depression to create this more top government control. There's more bureaucracy in the federal government, less local control and more federal. So again, they exploit crises. They use crises to transform the system.
And the educational system, you're taught in coming up in high school and studying government and social studies is that everybody was for the New Deal. Well, the New Deal had things that it had to do to create more jobs, but there were people who called that socialism. There were people who were against the New Deal.
In 1932, when FDR was running against Hoover, they were basically indistinguishable on policy. They weren't that far different. He completely flipped after the election. So he basically tricked the American people, sort of similar to how Obama did in 2008. He was running as this moderate. I'm just a moderate. Once he gets in office, he implements all this Marxists and all this controlling policy.
And then you have 50 years of control of both chambers of the Democrats, which leads to LBJ. Johnson with the Great Society. More on poverty. Correct. So more of a technocratic, legislative, administrative state that are saying to the states, you have to run these big federal government programs.
The welfare state.
And create the welfare state. And thankfully, we had Reagan that came in the 70s. Reagan was the first person to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe the federal government is the problem. Maybe it's the bureaucrats. Maybe it's the size of the federal government, and looking at ways to trim federal government. The one thing that Reagan used to always say is, what's the biggest danger? And the biggest danger is somebody coming to your door saying, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
I remember Reagan, if you go back to his 88 convention speech, in 1988, he made a point that one of his greatest achievements was increasing the efficiency of government. So he gave an example, something like, if you want to get a new passport, before you came into office, it took like 42 days to get a new passport or to renew your passport. Whereas in 1988 when he was talking, it took 11 days on average. That's some of the things that Reagan brought to the federal government is he increased the efficiency of the federal government. It has to be efficient. It has to serve the people, not the bureaucracy.
And World Economic Reagan and Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher, would have warned against this New World Order 2.0. Thatcher was against the European Union, was against Great Britain being in the European Union because they felt that countries were giving up their sovereignty.
Exactly.
And if you read Friedrich Hayek and The Road to Serfdom, the book that came out right after World War II, Hayek predicted that countries would be losing their sovereignty and they would be falling prey to overarching global administrations like the United Nations and like the Soviet Union. So we really worry about that with the World Economic Forum. And, anytime there's a crisis, this crisis will leave the world less sustainable. Talking about COVID-19, this is on the Great Reset website for the World Economic Forum. This crisis will leave the world less sustainable, less equal, and more fragile. And we can quickly make radical changes to our lifestyle through the World Economic Forum. So there's a shift towards state.
And I feel like Obama, he started this path towards globalism. Would you say that's fair?
Well, I'm not one to talk about globalism because I am kind of a globalist as an international relations guy and foreign policy person. So I'm more of an internationalist than I'm a.
But you're coming at it from a foreign policy. By definition, that's global, right? I mean, we're global thinkers on here. So I'm not saying that global thinking or globalism is necessarily bad, but I believe in a nation state. I believe that I'm an American, somebody else is Canadian, somebody else is Russian, somebody else is French. As an American, I have my beliefs, and I should be able to live my life as an American according to my own wishes, according to the Constitution, not according to some global elite, in Brussels.
Well, Obama had the apology tour, remember. He went around to the Middle East, he went around to different European countries and apologized for the behavior of America. We don't have to apologize for our behavior. We lead the world in many different things, in technology and our democratic capitalist system and our education system, especially higher ed, which is high quality despite how biased the professors are and the leaders of the academic institutions, but we still have very good schools. Right. So why go around apologizing? And I think that's part of it where Obama was giving up sovereignty and kind of saying, the United States is not exceptional. It's not doing a good job. I apologize for
our arrogance,
for our arrogance. Yeah.
I believe in American exceptionalism. I believe in American sovereignty. I want to live according to American way of life, not according to some bureaucrat in Davos.
Absolutely. And more on the Great Reset from the website, the World Economic Forum. So these crises will require stronger and more effective governments. See, there they go again. Every time they have a crisis, more control. So the Great Reset has three outcomes. One is that governments create a stakeholder economy. There's that stakeholder thing again. And then governments perform to promote equitable outcomes. No, we believe in equal opportunity when you are born, but we don't believe in equal outcomes. That is socialism. Correct. That is taking away opportunity. So equitable outcomes, there's that equity word. They never define equity, but they always talk about it. Right. Change wealth taxes. So, increase wealth taxes, withdraw fossil fuel subsidies. So war on fossil fuels. Don't forget that about the environment. You got to have a victim and you got to have an enemy. And the enemy is the oil and gas industry.
Solinsky.
There's that Solinsky thing. Yeah. And then new rules for intellectual property, new rules for trade, new rules for competition, invest for equality and sustainability. That's part of the Great Reset. And then be green, ESG initiatives, environmental, social, and governance, which we talked about. So we're losing sovereignty. Well, George Soros, he's a billionaire, and he got most of his money trading currency. He shorted the British pound quite a while ago, and he always had his Open Society Foundation. Now, originally, George Soros used the Open Society Foundation to combat Soviet control. He was against the Soviet Union, and he used the Open Society Foundation to give money to democratic causes. Hey, that's great. He helped, change the Cold War. to our favor. So Soros had that first part of his political career, and then he changed. And I'm not sure how he became so left-wing. Most of it was under George W. Bush. Would you agree with that?
He became more left-wing in the Clinton era, right?
Clinton
He
era.
founded the MoveOn.org. That was a Soros thing. He was a big critic of the first Bush administration. He called it fascist. And he said that they were too nationalistic, that they didn't understand that problems of the future would require global cooperation. He's been funding. So I'm not really sure what is his goal. He's funding all these left-wing nonprofits, all of these prosecutors across the country. What is his end goal?
I would say it's part of the Great Reset. So again,
He's definitely tied to the Great Reset.
elites know better. And it really surprised me. It shouldn't surprise me. But it used to be his Open Society Foundation invested in right-wing causes and freedom. He was really about freedom and individual rights, and then it changed. But the scary thing is he got involved in local politics in the United States by funding these ultra left-wing district attorneys. And he kind of announced that's what he was doing, but I didn't really at the time believe he could pull it off. But he did. He got district attorneys that are soft on crime elected all across the United States. We have one. We talked about this before the podcast. We live in Arlington, Virginia, right across the river from Washington, D.C., across the Potomac.
Yep.
We are a very wealthy, left-wing, elitist suburb, and it's nice to live here. But that's not the point. But Soros...
So far, nice to live there.
Soros got a pro soft on crime district attorney in this county.
Right. And also Fairfax and Loudoun.
And other counties that are suburbs of Washington, D.C. and Virginia, and Northern Virginia. So this is really scary. And the World Economic Forum loves George Soros. He's always a speaker there and believes in this global system of political decision-making and technocracy, open borders, eliminate the nation state. These are all aspects of the eradication of national sovereignty. And Soros also believes in modern monetary theory, so the idea that unlimited government spending, unlimited monetary policy can create wealth. And what it really means is it creates inflation. We have global inflation right now. It's just not in the United States. It's in other countries. And it's because of these spending habits from these social democratic countries that are pretty much socialist now. I mean, we have people in the United States that rebranded themselves. I love how socialists rebrand themselves. We are now democratic socialists, like Bernie Sanders and AOC.
Right.
Let's rebrand it so it sounds like it's European. No, it's socialism. And it's definitely, if you try to make the changes to the way it's called, the monikers, it's still the same thing. So we have stakeholder capitalism with ESG. We have sustainable development goals. So these are the goals that the United Nations has come up with that rate countries on how well they do with their environment, with their healthcare, with their economy. So these are social sustainable development goals from the United Nations. This, again, is an overarching international organization that is entering the government of self-governing countries. They're taking away sovereignty. And this is what the World Economic Forum wants. They want to take over that sovereignty. They want to have a war on small business. They want to have climate change, conspiracy theories, and an overall transformation of society to enact reforms based on climate change. Now, I want to say something. Vadim and I walk everywhere. This is a walkable community. We have a low carbon footprint. I would say our carbon footprint is lower than Bill Gates's. I've never been on a private jet. And I've recycled my whole marriage. I've been married over a decade, and we recycle. I believe in conservation. Mm-hmm. I believe in national parks. I believe the government can sometimes step in and fight pollution. I'm against pollution. I'm for clean air and clean water. And the United States has actually cut carbon over the years. And we have less smog. We have cleaner water. We have cleaner air. And also on this podcast, we believe in all of the above energy sources, which is fossil fuels and a little bit of nuclear and some So solar and some wind. I lived in Texas. Texas is the number one state in the union for energy. Number one in oil production, number one in natural gas, number one in wind, and number two in solar. So unleashing American energy has a way to make sure that we're energy independent and a way to make sure that we do not fall victim to these overarching international organizations like the World Economic Forum. Unleash energy. We wouldn't have such high gas prices if the World Economic Forum and the Biden administration hadn't declared war on the energy business. So this is all very frustrating, and we hope that you go to the World Economic Forum website and read this on your own, because you should.
Do your own research. There's so much in here that we just barely scratched the surface of the implications of the Great Reset.
And remember, individual freedom is what we believe in, and also countries. A lot of people, when you talk about individual freedom, you're talking about one human being. But remember, countries want to remain free too, and they want to resist these international organizations that are overarching authorities that take away sovereignty. So remember, language, culture, and borders, these are very important things to a nation state. If we eliminate the nation state and we let the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset take over, we're leading to a world that subjugates individual freedom and takes away sovereignty from countries.
Exactly. The Great Reset is very frightening. It's this idea that, again, that we will be controlled by these global elites. We're not going to have free will. We're not going to have individual liberty. They will tell us how to run our business. They will tell us what to eat. They'll tell us how to travel, how to sleep, where to sleep, what our bed is made out of, what kind of food we can eat. Can we eat meat? Can we eat regular meat or grass-fed meat or meat substitutes? So they will have full control. Imagine having a rule that you must exercise 3 days a week if you want to eat a burger. Yeah. Something like that could be implemented in the digital world.
World Economic Forum, reshape the world, have a giant transformation, shape the post-crisis world, shape the global agenda, responsible globality. Okay, so remember, these are Orwellian themes. They change this stuff every year, and they have this word salad of different types of platitudes.
There's one more thing I wanted to mention about Soros. Leaked documents from Soros's Open Society Foundations show it is clearly devoted to the eradication of national sovereignty and using crises to advance its political and social goals. For Soros, the only way to address these and other related perceived problems is to establish a new global system of political decision-making. So you see how this is the beginnings of the Great Reset, global system as opposed to a nation state. And then so I want to read this quote from his 2007 book, The Age of Fallibility. The main obstacle to a stable and just world order is the United States. This is a harsh, indeed for me, painful thing to say, but unfortunately, I'm convinced it is true. The United States continues to set the agenda for the world, in spite of its loss of influence since 9/11, and the Bush administration is setting the wrong agenda. Remember, this is 2007. The Bush agenda is nationalistic. It emphasizes the use of force and ignores global problems whose solution requires international cooperation. So you see how Soros wants to displace the United States as a global superpower. He sees the United States as the problem, as an obstacle to this global system of decision-making that he's talking about.
And then if you disagree with him, he paints you as a nationalist. Don't let them call you nationalist just because you believe in American exceptionalism and you're a patriotic American. You're not a nationalist. You just believe that America is the best country in the world.
There's nothing wrong with being a nationalist. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, you're usually more patriotic that way. And you believe that the United States system of democratic capitalism is the way to go. So, well, let's wrap up a little bit on the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. So we have war on small business. So don't forget that. A few big corporations are easier to control than a lot of small businesses. We have stakeholder capitalism and ESG. So look that up. We have modern monetary theory. So deficits don't matter. Debt doesn't matter. Spend as much as you can. Have loose monetary policy and someday have a global digital currency. You eradicate national sovereignty with the Open Society Foundation.
Open borders.
Yeah. open borders, you eliminate the nation state. It all goes back to the World Economic Forum. You have a global system of political decision making. And so you have all these things, World Economic Forum. Check it out on their website. Read some of the reports. This is not a conspiracy theory. Don't let them call you a conspiracy theorist. You just say that this is the stuff that they put out all the time on the World Economic Forum website.
Modern monetary theory with unlimited spending, debt and deficits don't matter. ESG scores will be used to determine your trustworthiness, your allegiance to the regime.
Pro-China.
Pro-China. That's a good point. Yes. So ruling elites of Wall Street, Davos, and DC will tell us how to live our life. So remember, the goal of the Great Reset is to create one global techno-fascist state. That's the main thing we want you to remember from this episode. One global techno-fascist state.
Transform the global economy, eliminate free markets, impose a new, more easily controllable and malleable economic system. That is the Great Reset.
Transform the global economy, eliminate free markets, impose a new, more easily controllable and malleable economic system, and change the way people think of private property and corporation. In sum, the Great Reset is the antithesis of the America as our founding fathers had in mind.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope that we gave you food for thought. Research this, learn about it. There's books on this. Look at their website. Pay attention to the next Davos meeting to see what's going to happen, what their next Orwellian theme is going to be, and educate yourself.
Yes. And in our next episode, we will talk about woke capitalism, what you need to know when it comes to wokeness that corporations are pushing on us.
Thank you. Until next time. Thank you for listening to the Truth Caviar Show. Email us at truthcaviarshow@gmail.com and let us know what you think about the show. And remember, no bias, no bull, no fear, just hard truths.